The sound of my 8-year-old daughter Emma's bedroom door slamming shut made me pause, halfway up the stairs. A basket of freshly folded laundry balanced against my hip. It was the kind of slam that spoke of hurt feelings rather than anger. And after 23 years of motherhood, I knew the difference. My 12-year-old son, Jake, had already retreated to his room an hour earlier, claiming he had homework, though I'd heard more video game sounds than pencil scratching through his door. Something was wrong. The afternoon had started normally enough. I'd picked up both kids from their after-school programs, stopped for groceries, and returned home to our cozy 2-story house on Maple Street. But during our usual car ride chatter, both children had been unusually quiet, stealing glances at me in the rear-view mirror with expressions I couldn't quite read. When I'd asked about their day, I'd gotten one-word answers instead of their typical detailed recounts of playground drama and classroom adventures. Eleanor had been spending more time at our house lately, which I'd initially encouraged because I thought it would help her cope with her loneliness. She'd arrive most afternoons just as the kids got home from school, armed with homemade cookies and stories about their grandfather. I'd appreciated her efforts to keep Robert's memory alive for Emma and Jake, even if her presence sometimes felt overwhelming. She had a tendency to rearrange things in my kitchen and offer unsolicited advice about everything from my cooking to my parenting. But I'd bitten my tongue because I knew she was grieving. David, my husband of 20 years, worked long hours as an electrician and often didn't get home until after 6. He was a gentle man with kind eyes and calloused hands, someone who avoided conflict whenever possible. When I'd mentioned feeling a bit suffocated by his mother's constant presence, he'd given me that look that meant he didn't want to get caught between us. "She's just lonely, Maggie," he'd say, using the nickname he'd called me since college. "Try to be patient with her." His loyalty was split between supporting me and protecting his grieving mother, and I understood that, even when it left me feeling isolated. I set the laundry basket down and knocked gently on Emma's door. "Sweetheart, can I come in?" "I'm tired, Mom. Can we talk tomorrow?" Her voice was muffled, and I could tell she was lying face down on her bed. I tried Jake's room next, but got a similar response. Whatever had happened during that kitchen conversation had clearly upset both of my children, and they didn't want to talk to me about it. The realization sent a chill down my spine. Pulling out my phone, I texted Carol. "Something's wrong with the kids. Eleanor was here when we got home. Can you come over?" Her response came within minutes. "On my way." "I'll bring wine." When Carol knocked on the front door 20 minutes later, I practically pulled her inside. She took one look at my face and set down the bottle of wine she'd brought. "Okay, tell me everything," she said, settling onto my couch with the practiced ease of someone who'd talked me through countless family crises. I explained the afternoon's events, the children's strange behavior, and Eleanor's hasty departure. Carol listened with increasing concern, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Margaret, I think it's time you had a direct conversation with those kids," she said finally. "Whatever Eleanor told them, it's obviously something she didn't want you to hear. And based on how they're acting, it's something that's made them question you or your role in the family." Taking a deep breath, I knocked on Emma's door again, this time with more authority. "Emma, I need to talk to you and Jake. This can't wait until tomorrow." There was a long pause before I heard her footsteps. She opened the door just a crack, her eyes still puffy from crying. "Mom, I really don't want to talk right now. I know something happened with Grandma Eleanor today, and I need to understand what's going on. Will you please get Jake and meet me in the living room?" Emma's face crumpled slightly at the mention of Eleanor's name. "You're going to be mad at us." "Sweetheart, I could never be mad at you for telling me the truth." "Please, just give me 5 minutes. Carol stood up as Emma reluctantly shuffled toward Jake's room. "Do you want me to stay, or give you some privacy?" "Stay," I said immediately. "You might help me see things more clearly." "Okay," I said, settling into the armchair across from them. "I can see you're both upset about something Grandma Eleanor said today. Whatever it is, I promise I won't get angry. I just need to know what's going on." Emma glanced at Jake, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "Grandma Eleanor said that you killed Grandpa," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "She said you stressed him out so much that it gave him a heart attack. She said you were always arguing with him about money and making him worry about us kids," Jake added, his voice trembling. "She said that's why he got sick and died." Emma started crying again. "Is it true, Mom? Did you make Grandpa die?" My heart shattered at the fear and confusion in my daughter's voice. I moved to sit between them on the couch, pulling them both close despite their initial resistance. "No, sweetheart, that is absolutely not true," I said firmly. "Grandpa had heart disease. The doctors explained it to all of us. His arteries were blocked, and that's what caused his heart attack. It had nothing to do with stress or arguments, or anything I did or didn't do." "But Grandma Eleanor said you never really loved him," Jake said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "She said you only married him for his money, and that you made his life miserable." Carol made a sound of disgust from across the room, but I kept my focus on the children. The depth of Eleanor's betrayal was staggering, but right now, I needed to undo the damage she'd done to their sense of security. "Then why would Grandma Eleanor say those things?" Emma asked, pulling back to look at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Sometimes when people are grieving, they look for someone to blame," I said carefully. "Grandma Eleanor is still very sad about losing Grandpa, and sometimes it feels easier to be angry at someone than to just be sad." "But that's not fair to you," Jake said, and I was surprised by the indignation in his voice. "No, it's not fair," Carol interjected gently. "And it's especially not fair to tell children things that will upset them and make them worry." Emma leaned back against me. "I was so scared, Mom. I thought maybe we were going to lose you too, and it would be our fault for stressing you out." The casual cruelty of what Eleanor had done to these innocent children made my chest tight with rage. But I pushed it down. There would be time to deal with my mother-in-law later. "You will never lose me because of stress," I promised them. "And nothing that happens to me will ever be your fault. You two are the best parts of my life." Jake wiped his nose on his sleeve. "So Grandpa really didn't die because of you?" "Absolutely not. Grandpa died because his heart was sick, not because of anything any of us did or said." I felt some of the tension leave their small bodies as they processed this reassurance, but as they headed back to their rooms with promises to talk more if they had other worries, I realized the hardest conversation was still ahead of me. Eleanor had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I was going to have to figure out how to protect my children from any future attacks while somehow maintaining their relationship with their only living grandparent. But first, I had to decide exactly what I was going to say when I confronted her tomorrow. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at Eleanor's number in my phone. Part of me wanted to call her immediately and unleash every bit of fury I felt. But I knew that approaching this conversation in anger would only make things worse, especially if the children were within earshot at her house. Around 7, Jake wandered into the kitchen in his pajamas, hair sticking up at odd angles. "You're up early, Mom," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Couldn't sleep much. Want some pancakes?" "Sure." He slid into the chair across from me. "Are you okay? You look really tired." I studied his face, looking for lingering traces of the fear Eleanor had instilled, but he seemed more concerned about me than anything else. "I'm just thinking about some grown-up stuff," I said, getting up to gather ingredients. "How are you feeling this morning? Any more worries about what Grandma Eleanor said?" Jake was quiet for a moment, watching me measure flour into a bowl. "I talked to Emma after we went to bed last night." "Oh? What did you two talk about?" "She was still scared, but I told her what you said made more sense than what Grandma said." He paused, frowning. "Mom, why would Grandma Eleanor want us to think bad things about you?" The directness of his question caught me off guard. At 12, Jake was starting to see beyond the simple explanations I might have given him a few years ago. "That's a really good question, honey. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure myself." Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown. "Are we talking about Grandma Eleanor?" "A little bit," I said, adding milk to the pancake batter. "How are you feeling this morning, sweetheart?" I paused in my stirring. "What other things?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, and she's always asking if we wish we could live somewhere bigger, or if we get embarrassed that you have to work so much." I felt a chill run through me. I had no idea Eleanor had been planting these seeds of dissatisfaction with our life for who knows how long. "And how do those questions make you feel?" I asked carefully. "Confused, mostly," Jake said. "Because I never thought about being embarrassed that you work. I think it's cool that you have your own business." I poured batter onto the griddle, using the activity to buy myself time to process this information. Eleanor hadn't just attacked me yesterday. She'd been systematically undermining my relationship with my children for months, maybe longer. "I'm glad you two told me about those conversations," I said finally. "It helps me understand some things." "Are you going to talk to Grandma Eleanor about what she said yesterday?" Emma asked. "Yes, I am." "Are you going to be mean to her?" Jake's question was tinged with worry. "What if she gets mad?" Emma asked. "Then she gets mad. But my job is to protect you two, not to keep Grandma Eleanor happy." The children exchanged a look that seemed far too mature for their ages. "Mom," Jake said slowly, "do you think Grandma Eleanor loves us? But if she loves us, why would she try to make us scared and sad?" Emma's voice was small. I turned off the burner and faced them directly. This conversation was veering into territory I hadn't expected to navigate today, but I realized they needed these answers. Sometimes adults do harmful things, even when they love someone. Grandma Eleanor is dealing with a lot of sadness about losing Grandpa, and sometimes that sadness makes her act in ways that aren't fair or kind. "And I felt bad about it later," Jake said. "Exactly. The difference is that you're 12 and you apologized to Emma and tried to do better." Grandma Eleanor is an adult, which means she has a bigger responsibility to control her emotions and think about how her actions affect other people. Emma pushed syrup around on her pancakes thoughtfully. "So, what happens now?" "Now, I'm going to have a conversation with Grandma Eleanor about boundaries, about what kinds of things are appropriate for her to discuss with you, and what kinds of things are not." "What if she doesn't listen?" Jake asked. I met his eyes steadily. "Then we'll have to make some difficult decisions about how much time you spend with her until she can respect those boundaries." The weight of that possibility settled over all of us. Eleanor was their only living grandparent, their last connection to their father's family. But I couldn't continue to expose them to her toxic influence just to preserve that relationship. "Can we stay here today, instead of going to Grandma Eleanor's after school?" Emma asked quietly. "Of course. I was planning to talk to her this morning anyway, so you'll both be here with me today." After breakfast, the children settled into their usual weekend routines. Jake, with his video games, Emma with her art supplies spread across the dining room table. I waited until they seemed absorbed in their activities before stepping onto the back porch to call Eleanor. She answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," Eleanor said, her tone defensive before I'd even spoken. "We need to talk, Eleanor." "In person? I suppose you're upset about yesterday?" The casual way she dismissed what had happened made my jaw clench. My children spent last night terrified that they were going to lose me too, and that it would be their fault. So yes, I'm upset. "Maybe if you hadn't been eavesdropping—" "I'm coming over," I interrupted. "We're going to settle this now." I hung up before Eleanor could respond and stood on the porch for a moment, steeling myself for what was coming. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Jake and Emma going about their morning routines. But there was a subdued quality to their movements that hadn't been there before yesterday. "Hey guys," I called as I stepped back inside. "I'm going to go talk to Grandma Eleanor now. I'll probably be gone about an hour." Emma looked up from her drawing. "Are you going to be okay?" The fact that my 10-year-old daughter was worried about my emotional well-being during a family conflict made my heart ache. "I'm going to be fine. This is an adult conversation that needs to happen, and I can handle it." "What if she yells at you?" Jake asked, pausing his game. "Then I'll stay calm and keep talking about what needs to change. Sometimes people yell when they're feeling defensive, but that doesn't mean the conversation has to end." The 20-minute drive to Eleanor's house gave me time to organize my thoughts, but I still felt my pulse quicken as I pulled into her driveway. Her house looked exactly the same as it had when David was alive, down to the seasonal wreath on the front door and the precisely maintained flower beds. She'd frozen everything in place, as if changing anything would mean accepting that he was really gone. Eleanor opened the door before I could knock, her silver hair pulled back in its usual severe bun, her mouth set in a thin line. "I suppose you've come to lecture me about my relationship with my grandchildren?" she said, without preamble. "I've come to talk about boundaries, Eleanor, about what's appropriate to discuss with Jake and Emma, and what isn't." She stepped aside to let me in, but her posture remained rigid. "Those children are all I have left of my son." "They're all I have left of my husband," I replied, settling into the familiar living room where David's senior portrait still held the place of honor on the mantel. "But using them as emotional outlets for our grief isn't fair to them." "I wasn't using them as emotional outlets. I was trying to help them understand what really happened to their father." The casualness of her tone made my stomach clench. "Eleanor, you told them that I killed David with stress. How is that helping them understand anything, except that they should be afraid of losing me too?" For the first time since I'd arrived, Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. She sank into David's old recliner, the one she'd refused to move or reupholster despite its worn fabric. "David was always stressed when he lived here," she said quietly. "Always worried about work, about money, about whether he was doing the right thing. After he married you and you started having problems with your business, he'd call me every week talking about the financial pressure, about how he didn't know if you could make the mortgage payments." I felt as if she'd slapped me. "Eleanor, every married couple deals with financial stress. Every small business owner goes through difficult periods. That doesn't mean—" "He had 3 panic attacks that last year," Eleanor interrupted. 3. He told me about every one of them, how his heart would race, how he couldn't breathe, how he'd have to pull over on his way home from work because he was so overwhelmed. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "Because he didn't want to worry you when you were already struggling to keep your business afloat." He was trying to protect you from knowing how much the financial situation was affecting him. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to reconcile this information with my memories of that last year. David had seemed tired, maybe a little distant, but he'd never indicated that he was having panic attacks or that the stress was affecting him so severely. Eleanor, even if David was having panic attacks, that doesn't mean I killed him. Heart attacks can happen to anyone at any age. His cardiologist said stress was a contributing factor, Eleanor cut in. I was there at the hospital when he explained it. Stress, poor diet, lack of exercise, genetic predisposition, but stress was on that list. So were 3 other factors, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. And you've decided to focus only on the one you can blame me for. Eleanor's face hardened again. I've decided to focus on the truth. The truth! I stood up, anger finally overwhelming my desire to stay diplomatic. The truth is that David chose not to tell me he was having panic attacks. The truth is that he chose not to address his stress levels or seek help for them. The truth is that he had high cholesterol and hadn't been to the gym in 2 years and lived on fast food because he said he didn't have time for proper meals. But none of that fits your narrative that I'm the villain in this story. Don't you dare suggest that David was responsible for his own death? Eleanor snapped. I'm not suggesting that anyone was responsible for David's death. That's the point, Eleanor. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no one to blame. Sometimes we lose the people we love, and it's not because someone failed, or someone was careless, or someone didn't love them enough. Eleanor stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the battle playing out across her features. The need to blame someone, to make sense of a senseless loss, warring with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was no satisfactory explanation for why her son was gone. Those children need to know what kind of pressure their father was under, she said finally. Those children need to feel secure and loved and supported while they're grieving their father, I replied. They don't need to carry adult burdens or worry about adult relationship dynamics they can't possibly understand. So, I'm supposed to pretend that everything was perfect? That there were no problems? You're supposed to let them be children. You're supposed to focus on sharing positive memories of their father instead of trying to litigate the circumstances of his death with 10 and 12-year-olds. Eleanor was quiet for several minutes, staring at David's portrait. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I'd heard it since the funeral. I miss him so much that I can barely breathe sometimes. The raw pain in her voice deflated my anger instantly. I know you do. I miss him too. But you get to move on. You're young. You're attractive. You'll find someone else eventually. This is it for me. He was my only child, and now he's gone, and I don't know how to exist in a world without him. The conversation had shifted into territory I hadn't expected, and I found myself sitting back down, trying to navigate this new emotional landscape. Eleanor, moving forward doesn't mean replacing David or forgetting him, and it certainly doesn't mean I don't miss him every single day. I'm not trying to erase you. I'm trying to protect them from conversations that scare them and make them feel unsafe. There's a difference. Eleanor looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. What if I promised not to discuss the circumstances of David's death with them anymore? That would be a start, I said carefully. What else? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would either repair this relationship or destroy it completely. I need you to stop undermining my parenting decisions. When I tell them they can't have ice cream before dinner, or that they need to finish their homework before playing video games, I need you to support those decisions instead of contradicting them. Eleanor's mouth tightened. I suppose I have been a bit indulgent. And I need you to talk to me directly if you have concerns about how I'm raising them, instead of expressing those concerns to Jake and Emma. Is there anything else on your list? Eleanor asked, and I couldn't tell if the edge in her voice was sarcasm or defensiveness. Eleanor was quiet for so long that I began to wonder if she was going to respond at all. Finally, she nodded slowly. I can try to do those things. Eleanor, I need more than trying. I need a commitment. Because if these patterns continue, I'm going to have to limit the time Jake and Emma spend here, and I don't want to do that. They love you, and they need their connection to David's family. They need their connection to David's family, but they don't need their connection to me specifically, Eleanor said bitterly. That's not true. You're their grandmother. You have stories about David's childhood that no one else can share. You have his baby pictures and his report cards and memories of who he was before I knew him. That's irreplaceable, Eleanor, but I won't sacrifice my children's emotional security to preserve it. I never wanted to scare them, she said quietly. I believe that, but impact matters more than intention when it comes to children. Eleanor nodded again, more firmly this time. You're right. I've been so focused on my own grief that I haven't been thinking about theirs. Their grief is different from ours, Eleanor. They need different things than we do. What do they need? The question seemed genuine, without the defensive edge that had characterized most of our conversation. They need stability. They need to feel safe talking about their father without worrying that it will make the adults around them fall apart. They need normal childhood experiences and problems. They need to know that the adults in their lives can handle difficult emotions without dumping those emotions onto them. Eleanor was quiet for another long moment. I think I've been doing exactly the opposite of all of those things. We all have moments where grief makes us act in ways we wouldn't normally act. The important thing is recognizing it and making changes. What if I can't change fast enough? What if I slip up and say something I shouldn't? Then you apologize to them and you try again. That's what we all do when we make mistakes with our children. Eleanor looked at David's portrait again. He would be disappointed in how I've been behaving, wouldn't he? The question hung between us, and I realized that this was the crux of everything. Eleanor wasn't just grieving David. She was terrified that she was failing him, that she was letting him down in how she was treating his children and his widow. I think David would understand that you're in pain, I said carefully. But I also think he'd want us to work together to take care of Jake and Emma, instead of working against each other. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears for the first time since David's funeral. I don't know how to do this without him. Neither do I admitted. But we're going to have to figure it out together, because those kids are counting on us. We sat in silence for several minutes, and I felt some of the tension that had been building between us for months finally begin to ease. Can I see them this afternoon? Eleanor asked eventually. I think that would be good. But Eleanor, if you're feeling overwhelmed, or if you catch yourself about to say something inappropriate, I need you to step back and take a break. Don't push through it for their sake. I understand. I stood to leave, feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. But as I reached the front door, Eleanor called my name. There's something else you need to know about David's last few months, she said, her voice strange. Something I probably should have told you sooner. My hand froze on the doorknob as a chill ran down my spine. I turned back slowly, my heart already racing before Eleanor had even spoken another word. The afternoon light streaming through her living room windows suddenly felt too bright, too harsh, illuminating the worry lines that had deepened around her eyes. "What do you mean?" I managed, though part of me didn't want to know. "David was having chest pains for about 3 months before his heart attack," she said quietly. "He made me promise not to tell you." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Chest pains? For 3 months?" "He said they weren't that bad. He said he didn't want to worry you with everything else you had going on. Your job was so stressful then, and Jake was having those problems at school." "Eleanor." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "He was having chest pains and didn't see a doctor?" "He did see a doctor." She looked down at her hands. "Dr. Martinez ran some tests. Said his blood pressure was elevated, wanted to put him on medication, and recommended some lifestyle changes. David said he'd think about it." I finally let go of the doorknob and walked back into the living room, but I didn't sit. Instead, I found myself pacing in front of the fireplace, past the mantel lined with photos of David at various stages of his life. David as a young father holding baby Jake. David at Emma's first piano recital. David at our wedding, looking so confident and healthy. "He never filled the prescription, did he?" Eleanor shook her head. "He kept saying he'd start eating better, exercise more. He bought that juicer, remember? And those running shoes he never wore." I remembered the juicer. It had sat on our kitchen counter for weeks, gathering dust while David continued his routine of coffee and donuts for breakfast, fast food lunches at work, and heavy dinners because he was always too tired to care about eating well. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Because I've been so angry at you for not taking better care of him, for not making him go to the doctor, for not forcing him to eat better, for not somehow preventing what happened." Eleanor's voice cracked. "But you didn't even know he was having symptoms." "And I did know, and I didn't do anything either. All those times he came home exhausted, all those nights he said he was too tired to go for walks with us," I said, more to myself than to Eleanor. "I thought it was just work stress." "He made me promise," Eleanor repeated, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. "He said he'd handle it. And when he had the heart attack, when the paramedics were asking me about his medical history, about any symptoms," I stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "I told them he'd been fine. I told them there were no warning signs. But it did matter. It mattered because for 4 months, I'd been second-guessing every meal I'd cooked, every stressful conversation we'd had, every time I'd asked him to help with household repairs or stay up late talking through family problems. I'd been carrying the weight of wondering if somehow, in some way I couldn't identify, I had contributed to his death. The doctors might have been able to save him if they'd known about the previous symptoms," I said quietly. "Maybe, or maybe not. Dr. Martinez said later that David's arteries were severely blocked. He said it had been building for years, probably decades." I sank into David's old recliner, the leather still holding the faint impression of his body. "So when you told Jake and Emma that I killed their grandfather with stress, I was projecting my own guilt onto you." Eleanor's words came out in a rush. I was angry at myself for keeping his secret, for not pushing harder, for not calling you when he had those pains. It was easier to blame you than to admit that I failed him too. The house felt impossibly quiet around us. Even the usual neighborhood sounds seemed muted, as if the world was holding its breath while we untangled months of misdirected grief and anger. "We both failed him," I said finally. "But maybe that's not the right way to think about it." Eleanor looked up at me questioningly. Maybe David failed us by not letting the people who loved him help take care of him? Maybe he failed Jake and Emma by not prioritizing his health when they needed him to be around. He was so stubborn, Eleanor said, and for the first time since his funeral, she almost smiled. Remember when he insisted on fixing the roof himself that one summer? Spent 3 weekends up there with no idea what he was doing. And it leaked worse than before, I finished. We had to call a real roofer anyway. We sat in the shared memory for a moment, and I realized this was the first time Eleanor and I had reminisced about David, without it turning into a comparison of who loved him more, or who was taking better care of his memory. Eleanor, I need you to promise me something. She nodded. No more secrets. If there's anything else about David's health, about his last months, about anything that affects Jake and Emma, I need to know. We can't help each other, or help them if we're not working with complete information. I promise. There is... She hesitated. There is one more thing. My stomach dropped again. What? The life insurance company called me last week. They have some questions about the policy. What kind of questions? I managed to ask, though my throat felt tight. Eleanor twisted her hands in her lap, not meeting my eyes. They want to know about the timeline, when his symptoms started, what we knew, when we knew it. The agent said it's routine, but she kept asking specifically about whether David had seen any doctors in the months before he died. And what did you tell them? I told them he hadn't, which was true. But now I'm worried they think we're hiding something, or that they won't pay out the policy because he didn't disclose his symptoms when he renewed it last year. I closed my eyes, trying to process this new information. The life insurance money was supposed to help with Jake and Emma's college funds, something David had been adamant about even when money was tight. Eleanor, this is exactly what I meant about no more secrets. Why didn't you call me when they first contacted you? Because I was afraid you'd be angry that I was the beneficiary instead of you. David set it up that way years ago, before you and Michael got divorced, and he never changed it. I was going to split it with you for the children, but I thought you might not believe me. The complexity of David's final gift was becoming clearer and more complicated. I'm not angry about that. David trusted you to do right by Jake and Emma. But these insurance questions worry me. The agent is calling back tomorrow. She wants to schedule a more formal interview. I stood up and began pacing around Eleanor's small living room, past the photographs of David at various ages, past his reading glasses still sitting on the side table. We need to tell Jake and Emma about this, I said. Not the details, but they should know there might be delays with their grandfather's insurance. Do you think the insurance company will find out about the symptoms he hid? I don't know. Dr. Martinez might have to provide records. They might interview him too. I stopped pacing and looked at Eleanor directly. But we're going to be completely honest with them. No more protecting David's secrets if it means hurting Jake and Emma's futures. Eleanor nodded slowly. You're right. I just keep thinking about how disappointed he'd be if he knew his secrecy might cost them their college money. He should have thought of that before he decided to hide chest pains from everyone who loved him. The front door opened, and I heard Jake's voice calling out, "Grandma, are you home?" "In the living room," Eleanor called back, quickly wiping her eyes. Jake appeared in the doorway, still in his soccer uniform, grass stains on his knees and his hair damp with sweat. Emma followed behind him, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, Mom," Jake said, seeming surprised to see me. "Is everything okay? You both look weird." Emma studied our faces with the perceptive intensity she'd developed since David's death. "Are you guys fighting again?" "No, honey, we're not fighting," I said, glancing at Eleanor. "Actually, we've been talking through some things, and we're understanding each other better. Good, Emma said firmly, because Grandpa wouldn't want you two arguing all the time. Jake kicked at the carpet with his cleats. Can I ask you guys something without you getting mad? Eleanor and I exchanged looks. Of course, I said. I looked at Eleanor, remembering my demand for no more secrets. If that was going to be our new rule, it had to include the children too. You're right, I said. Sit down, both of you. Your grandmother and I have some things to explain. But as Jake and Emma settled onto the couch, Eleanor's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, and her face went pale. It's the insurance company, she whispered. They said they weren't calling until tomorrow. Should I answer it? Eleanor whispered to me. Yes, I said firmly. We said no more secrets, remember? Answer it. Put it on speaker so we can all hear what they're saying. Eleanor's eyes widened. With Jake and Emma here? They just told us they're not little kids anymore, I replied, looking at my children. They deserve to know what's happening with their grandfather's insurance, especially since it affects their college funds. Jake sat up straighter on the couch. Is that why you guys have been so stressed lately? Because of Grandpa's life insurance? The phone was still ringing. Eleanor looked between me and the kids, clearly torn. Grandma, just answer it, Emma said with exasperation. We can handle whatever it is. Eleanor took a deep breath and answered the call, pressing the speaker button. Hello, this is Eleanor Hoffman. Mrs. Hoffman, this is Jennifer Chen from Metropolitan Life Insurance. I know we scheduled our call for tomorrow, but I wanted to reach out today because we've received some additional information that requires clarification. Eleanor's face went ashen. What kind of additional information? We've been reviewing your husband's medical records as part of our standard investigation process. Dr. Martinez provided records showing that your husband had been experiencing chest pains for several weeks before his death, but there's no indication he sought treatment or informed family members. Jake and Emma exchanged glances. I could see the questions forming in their eyes. I see, Eleanor said carefully. And what does that mean for the claim? Well, Mrs. Hoffman, we need to understand why Mr. Hoffman didn't disclose these symptoms on his most recent policy renewal 6 months ago. There's a specific question about chest pain or cardiac symptoms that was answered, no. Eleanor looked at me with panic in her eyes. I moved closer to her, offering what support I could. Ms. Chen, I interjected. This is Sarah, David's daughter-in-law. Can you explain what happens next in this process? Are you authorized to discuss this matter, Mrs. Morrison? And yes, Eleanor asked me to be present for family support. There was a pause on the line. I'm sorry. Who is speaking? This is Emma Morrison, David's granddaughter. My brother Jake is here too. Eleanor started to shake her head, but I placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Ms. Chen, I said, the whole family is here because this affects all of us. The children have been asking about their grandfather's death, and we've been trying to decide how much to tell them. This call is actually helping us have a conversation we needed to have anyway. I see. Well, this is somewhat unusual, but if the family consents to discussing this matter openly, we do, Jake said firmly. We want to know the truth about what happened to Grandpa. Eleanor looked at me helplessly. I nodded encouragingly. Ms. Chen, Eleanor said, what specifically do you need to know? Did anyone in the family observe Mr. Hoffman experiencing chest pain, shortness of breath, or other cardiac symptoms in the months before his death? The room fell silent. I watched Jake's face as understanding dawned. He was holding his chest that day when we played catch, Jake said quietly. I asked him if he was okay, and he said he just pulled a muscle. Emma's eyes filled with tears. and he kept sitting down when we went for walks. He said he was just tired from work. Eleanor began crying softly. He made us all promise not to worry, that he was just getting older. So the family was aware of symptoms? Miss Chen asked gently. We were aware he seemed more tired, I said carefully. But he specifically told us not to worry and that it wasn't serious. We trusted him to seek medical care if he needed it. Did anyone encourage him to see a doctor? Eleanor wiped her eyes. I begged him to make an appointment. Sarah did too. But he kept saying we were overreacting. Jake leaned forward. Is this going to mess up our college money? Another pause from Ms. Chen. I can't make any determinations at this point. We're still gathering information. But I want to assure you that we're not looking to deny valid claims. We just need to understand the full picture. What happens if you decide he did withhold information? Emma asked, her voice small. Emma, Eleanor said gently. Maybe we shouldn't. No, Grandma, I want to know. This is about our family. So, what's the next step? I asked. I'll need to schedule individual interviews with each family member who observed symptoms, and we'll need written statements about what you witnessed and any conversations about seeking medical care. Eleanor looked overwhelmed. How long does this process take? Usually 4 to 6 weeks for a complete investigation. I know this is difficult during your time of grief. After we ended the call, the 4 of us sat in heavy silence. Emma was the first to speak. Grandpa was scared, wasn't he? Eleanor nodded through her tears. I think he was terrified of what the doctors might find. But now his being scared might cost us the insurance money? Jake asked. We don't know that yet, I said firmly. But yes, it's possible. Emma stood up suddenly, her face flushed with anger. This is so stupid. He died because he was too proud to go to the doctor, and now we're all being punished for it. Emma, Eleanor said softly, your grandfather wasn't trying to hurt anyone. But he did hurt us, Emma shouted. He hurt you, he hurt Mom, and now maybe Jake and I won't have college money because he was too stubborn to take care of himself. Jake stared at his sister with surprise. Emma rarely raised her voice, and never about their grandfather. I'm so angry at him, Emma continued, tears streaming down her face. And I feel terrible for being angry at him because he's dead, and I miss him so much. Eleanor stood and pulled Emma into a hug. Oh, sweetheart, it's okay to be angry. I'm angry at him too. You are? Jake asked. Yes, Eleanor said firmly. I'm furious that he put his pride ahead of his family's well-being, and I'm angry that his choices are still causing problems even after he's gone. I felt a wave of relief hearing Eleanor finally express anger toward David instead of directing it at me. So what do we do now? Jake asked. We tell the truth in those interviews, I said. We explain exactly what we saw and what we said to him, and we hope the insurance company understands that we all tried to get him to seek help. But what if they don't? Emma asked, pulling away from Eleanor's embrace. Then we figure out another way, I said. You two are still going to college. We'll find scholarships, loans, whatever it takes. Eleanor looked at me with surprise. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. David's poor choices don't get to ruin Jake and Emma's futures. Jake studied my face. Mom, are you okay with all this? Having to deal with Grandpa's mess? Is that why you and Grandma were fighting? Emma asked. Because you were angry at Grandpa? Eleanor and I looked at each other. Partly, Eleanor admitted. I was so hurt and scared that I said some horrible things to your mother that I didn't mean. Eleanor's face crumpled. Yes, that was cruel and completely untrue. Your mother tried harder than anyone to get your grandfather to take care of himself. We know that, Emma said firmly. We saw how worried Mom was about him. There was a long pause before Jake spoke again. So, what happens to our family now? Before anyone could answer, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went completely white. What is it? I asked. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. It's from Dr. Martinez. He wants to meet with me tomorrow about David's medical records. He says there's something about David's last visit that he needs to discuss before he talks to the insurance company. The room fell silent as we all stared at Eleanor's phone, wondering what other secrets David might have kept. My heart started racing as I watched the color drain from Eleanor's face. What could Dr. Martinez possibly need to discuss that he hasn't already told us? I don't know, Eleanor whispered, still staring at her phone. The text just says he reviewed David's file more thoroughly and there's something important he needs to share before he submits his report to the insurance company. Jake leaned forward in his chair. What if Grandpa was sicker than we thought? What if there was something really wrong with his heart that he never told us about? Or what if it's the opposite? Emma said quietly. What if Dr. Martinez found out that Grandpa knew exactly how serious his condition was and chose to ignore it anyway? Eleanor set her phone down with shaking hands. I've been dreading this moment since David died. The moment when I'd have to face whatever he was hiding from all of us. Do you want me to come with you to meet Dr. Martinez? I asked, surprising myself with the offer. Eleanor looked at me with tears in her eyes. You would do that? After everything I said to you? Eleanor, despite what happened between us, you're still family, and whatever Dr. Martinez has to say, it's going to affect all of us. Jake nodded firmly. Mom's right. We're all in this together now. But what if it's bad news? Eleanor asked. What if David knew he was dying and didn't tell anyone? What if he let his pride kill him when he could have been saved? Emma got up and sat on the arm of Eleanor's chair. Then we'll deal with it together. But beating yourself up about what Grandpa might have done isn't going to help anyone. She's right, I said. We can't keep torturing ourselves with what-ifs. We need to know the truth, whatever it is. Eleanor wiped her eyes. The appointment is at 2 tomorrow afternoon. Are you sure you want to come with me, Sarah? It might be difficult to hear. I'm sure, I said. Besides, if this affects the insurance claim, I need to know what we're dealing with. Jake stood up and started pacing around the living room. This is so messed up. Even after Grandpa's dead, we're still finding out he kept secrets from us. What kind of secrets do you think he kept? Emma asked. I don't know, Jake replied, running his hands through his hair. But remember how he always changed the subject whenever anyone asked about his doctor visits? And how he'd get angry if Mom or Dad suggested he take his medication more seriously? You noticed that too? Eleanor asked. I thought back to all those family dinners where David would brush off our concerns. He used to say that doctors just wanted to scare people into taking expensive medications they didn't need. But what if Dr. Martinez told him something really serious, and Grandpa just ignored it? Jake asked. What if he knew he could die and decided not to tell any of us? But why wouldn't he tell you? Emma asked. You were married for 32 years. Because your grandfather was terrified of appearing weak, Eleanor explained. He grew up believing that real men don't admit when they're scared or sick or need help. That's ridiculous, Jake said angrily. Being sick doesn't make you weak. Try telling that to a man who spent his whole life believing otherwise, I said sadly. Eleanor looked at me. Do you think David knew how sick he was when he had that fight with you and Jake? What do you mean? Emma asked. Jake stopped pacing. You think he found out he was really sick and took it out on us because we'd been telling him to see a doctor? It's possible, I said. People sometimes lash out at the people who care about them when they're scared. Eleanor buried her face in her hands. Oh God, what if that's exactly what happened? What if David knew he was dying and was too proud to tell us? Then that was his choice, Emma said firmly, and it wasn't fair to any of us. But I should have known, Eleanor said through her tears. I was his wife. I should have seen the signs. Eleanor, stop, I said more sharply than I intended. You can't blame yourself for David's decisions. None of us can read minds. Mom's right, Jake said, sitting back down. We all tried to help Grandpa. If he chose not to accept that help, that's on him, not on us. Eleanor looked up at Jake with red eyes. When did you get so wise? Probably around the time I realized that adults don't have all the answers either, Jake replied with a sad smile. So what do we do until tomorrow? Emma asked. Just sit here and worry about what Dr. Martinez is going to tell us. We could try to prepare ourselves for different scenarios, I suggested. Think about how we want to handle things, depending on what we find out. What kind of scenarios? Eleanor asked. Well, best case scenario is that Dr. Martinez just wants to clarify something minor before he submits his report, I said. And worst case? Jake asked. I took a deep breath. Worst case is that David knew exactly how sick he was, ignored medical advice, and the insurance company uses that information to deny the claim. Eleanor's phone buzzed again. We all froze, but she shook her head. It's just a reminder about a dentist appointment. I hate this, Emma said suddenly. I hate that we're all sitting here trying to figure out what Grandpa was thinking instead of just missing him. You can do both, sweetheart, Eleanor said gently. Missing someone doesn't mean you can't be angry at their choices. I keep thinking about all the things I wanted to ask him, Emma continued. And now I'm afraid that even if I could ask him, he wouldn't have told me the truth anyway. The room fell quiet as we all absorbed the weight of Emma's words. Finally, Jake spoke up. Whatever Dr. Martinez tells us tomorrow, we need to promise each other something. What? I asked. No more secrets. No more protecting each other from difficult truths. If we're going to be a family, we need to be honest with each other. Eleanor nodded slowly. You're right. David's secrets have caused enough damage. Agreed, I said. Starting right now, we tell each other the truth, even when it's hard to hear. Deal, Emma said. As if testing this new commitment, Jake looked directly at Eleanor. Grandma, are you going to be okay tomorrow? Really okay, not just pretending? Eleanor considered the question seriously. I'm scared about what we might learn. But having your mother there with me makes me feel less alone. So, yes, I think I'll be okay. Jake nodded, then turned to me. Mom, what are you most worried about? Honestly, I'm worried that whatever Dr. Martinez tells us tomorrow will make everything worse instead of better, I admitted. How could it get worse? Emma asked. What if we find out that David could have lived if he'd just followed medical advice? What if his stubbornness literally killed him? I said, voicing the fear that had been growing in my chest. Eleanor's voice was quiet but steady. Then we'll face that truth together, and we'll make sure his grandchildren learn from his mistakes. Just then, Eleanor's phone rang. We all jumped, and Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for it. It's Dr. Martinez, she whispered, her face going pale again. He's calling now. Should I answer it? She whispered, looking between me and the kids. Yes, I said, moving to sit beside her on the couch. We're all here. Whatever he says, We'll handle it together. Eleanor took a shaky breath and accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Hello, Dr. Martinez? Mrs. Chen, I hope I'm not calling too late. I know we have an appointment tomorrow, but I wanted to reach out tonight because I realized how worried you must be. Thank you for calling, Eleanor said, her voice steadier than I'd expected. We're all quite anxious about what you might have found. I can imagine. Mrs. Chen, I want to be very clear about something from the start. Your husband's death was not preventable by anything he could have done differently in his final weeks. I felt the tension leave Eleanor's shoulders as she sagged with relief. Emma grabbed Jake's hand. However, Dr. Martinez continued, and we all tensed again. The insurance company's questions have raised some concerns about David's medical history that I think you should be aware of. What kind of concerns? I asked, leaning toward the phone. Is this Sarah? Dr. Martinez asked. Yes, I'm here with Eleanor and her grandchildren. Good. I think it's important that the family hears this together. David had been experiencing symptoms for several months longer than any of us realized. The insurance investigation uncovered medical records from a clinic across town where he'd been seeking treatment. Eleanor's face went white. What kind of treatment? Blood pressure monitoring, primarily. It appears he was having episodes of dangerously high blood pressure, but was managing it with over-the-counter medications instead of seeking proper medical care. Why would he do that? Jake asked, his voice cracking slightly. Dr. Martinez's tone was gentle. From what I can piece together from his records, David was very worried about being a burden on his family. He seemed to believe that if he could manage his condition quietly, no one would have to worry about him. That stubborn fool, Eleanor whispered, tears starting to flow again. I would have taken care of him. We all would have. The tragic irony, Dr. Martinez continued, is that proper medical care could have prevented his heart attack entirely. But Mrs. Chen, I want you to understand that once David collapsed that day, there was nothing anyone could have done. By the time he reached the hospital, the damage was too extensive. Emma wiped her eyes with her sleeve. So Grandpa was trying to protect us by not telling us he was sick? It appears that way, yes. The records show he was quite concerned about the financial burden of medical care, and there are notes indicating he was worried about causing stress for his family. I felt a complex mix of emotions wash over me. Relief that David's death wasn't caused by family stress, anger at his secrecy, and heartbreak over his misguided attempt to protect everyone. Dr. Martinez, Eleanor said slowly, what does this mean for the insurance claim? That's actually the other reason I wanted to call tonight. The insurance company cannot deny a claim based on someone seeking medical care, even if it was inadequate. David's attempts to manage his condition actually support the claim rather than undermining it. So we don't have to worry about the money? Jake asked. The life insurance claim should be approved without any further issues. Dr. Martinez confirmed. After we said goodbye to Dr. Martinez, the four of us sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Emma spoke up. I don't know how to feel about this. I'm glad Grandpa was trying to protect us, but I'm also angry that he didn't trust us enough to let us help him. I think both of those feelings are okay, I said. Love and frustration can exist at the same time. Eleanor nodded slowly. David always was too proud for his own good. Even when we were first married, he hated asking for help with anything. Is that why you were so angry at Mom? Jake asked suddenly, looking at Eleanor. Because you thought she had done to Grandpa what Grandpa actually did to himself? Eleanor, don't do this to yourself, I said firmly. David was actively hiding his symptoms from everyone. You can't blame yourself for not seeing what he was determined to keep secret. Your mom is right, Eleanor said to the kids. I owe all of you an enormous apology. I said terrible things because I was in pain, but that's no excuse. Emma moved to sit on Eleanor's other side. We forgive you, Grandma, but Jake was right earlier about no more secrets. Absolutely no more secrets, Eleanor agreed. And no more trying to protect each other from difficult truths. Jake looked thoughtful. I keep thinking about how Grandpa thought he was being strong by handling everything alone, but actually, it made everything worse. That's a very mature observation, I said. Sometimes what we think is strength is actually fear dressed up in disguise. Eleanor suddenly sat up straighter. There's something else. Something I need to tell you all, and I suppose now is as good a time as any. I've been having some health issues of my own. Nothing serious, she added quickly, seeing our alarmed faces. But I've been putting off some tests because I didn't want to worry anyone so soon after David's death. Emma, Jake, and I all started talking at once, but Eleanor held up her hand. This is exactly what I mean about no more secrets. I'm going to schedule those tests this week, and I want Sarah to come with me. Of course, I said immediately. And I want all of you to know what the doctors find, good or bad. No more protecting each other from reality. Jake reached over and hugged his grandmother. We're going to take care of each other properly this time. As I watched Eleanor embrace her grandchildren, I felt something shift in our family dynamic. The crisis had broken us apart initially, but now we were rebuilding with a stronger foundation of honesty and trust. But even as I felt hopeful about our future, Eleanor's mention of her own health issues sent a chill through me. After everything we'd been through, I wasn't sure any of us were ready for another medical scare. The next few days passed in a strange new rhythm of radical honesty. Eleanor called every evening to update us on her doctor's appointments, and the kids started asking direct questions about everything from family finances to my own health. On Thursday evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Jake suddenly put down his fork and looked at me seriously. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to promise to tell me the truth. I promise, I said, though my stomach tightened. Emma nodded vigorously. Jake's right. You look exhausted, and you've been doing that thing where you rub your temples when you think we're not looking. I felt tears prick my eyes. You two are more observant than I gave you credit for. Is that a yes or a no? Jake pressed. It's a yes, I'm struggling, I admitted. I've been so focused on managing everyone else's emotions and trying to hold our family together that I haven't processed my own grief about losing Grandpa. And I've been terrified about what might happen with Grandma's health issues. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. Why didn't you tell us? Because I thought it was my job to be strong for you. That sounds familiar, Jake said pointedly. You're right. I was doing exactly what Grandpa did, wasn't I? Pretty much, Emma said gently. But we can fix it now. The next morning, Eleanor called earlier than usual, and her voice was lighter than it had been in months. Sarah, I have news about the tests. Tell me everything, I said, gripping the phone. The doctors found some issues with my blood pressure and cholesterol, but nothing that can't be managed with medication and lifestyle changes. No cancer, no heart disease, nothing immediately life-threatening. I sank into a chair with relief. Thank God. But here's the thing, Eleanor continued. The doctor said the stress from David's death and our family conflict probably made everything worse. She said family relationships have a huge impact on physical health. Eleanor, I'm so sorry for my part in that stress. We both played a role, but what matters is what we do now. I want to make sure Jake and Emma know they can always be honest with me about anything, even if they think it might hurt my feelings. That evening, Eleanor came over for dinner, and we sat the kids down for what Jake dubbed our first official family honesty meeting. "This feels weird," Emma said, "but good weird." "I want to start," Eleanor said. "Kids, I need you to know that what I said about your mom was completely wrong, and it came from my own pain, not from any truth. Your grandfather's death was not your mother's fault in any way." "We know that now, Grandma," Jake said, "but I want to ask you something. Why did you believe it yourself for so long?" "Is that why you were so mad at Mom specifically?" Emma asked. "Partly, but also because your mom was brave enough to have difficult conversations with your grandfather that I was too scared to have. When he'd get stressed about money or health, I'd just try to make everything pleasant and comfortable." Your mom would actually talk to him about his worries. I was surprised by this perspective. "Eleanor, I didn't know you saw it that way." Jake leaned forward. "So you were mad at Mom for doing what you wish you could have done?" "That's exactly right, Jake. And that's not fair to anyone. And if I'm stressed about something, I tell you instead of trying to handle it alone," I added. Eleanor nodded. "And if I'm having health problems or feeling lonely, I say so instead of suffering in silence." "What about happy things?" Jake asked. "Do we tell the truth about those too?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "You have book club friends?" Emma asked excitedly. "That's so sad, Grandma," Emma said. "We want you to have friends and do things you enjoy." "Can we meet them sometime?" Jake asked. "I'd love that," Eleanor said, and I could see her whole posture straighten with relief. As we cleaned up after dinner, Jake pulled me aside. "What do you mean?" Eleanor, overhearing, paused in drying dishes. "Jake, that might be the wisest thing anyone in this family has said in years." "Does this mean we're going to be okay?" Emma asked, joining our huddle by the kitchen counter. I looked around at these three people I loved so much, all of us imperfect and honest and trying our best. "I think we're going to be better than okay," I said. "I think we're going to be real." Ваш лайк — сигнал, что расследований нужно больше.